I once believed that the most dangerous thing in my life would be the slow surrender of years, the way age quietly empties a house. That's what I thought, until a single old photograph shattered decades of peace in just 3 days. The moment I found it, deep in the attic amid dust and faded papers, my hand began to shake so violently, I feared I'd tear right through the edges. My heart seemed to freeze and thunder at the same time, and suddenly, every carefully tucked away memory of family and sacrifice rushed in like a bitter wind. My name is Jung-hee. I am 62, nearing the 40th year of marriage to Young-soo. We have a son, Jin-soo, now married to Mi-jung, our daughter-in-law, and a daughter, Siona, who recently started the next chapter of her life with her husband Do-yeon. We are, from the outside, the perfect illustration of a traditional Korean family. Our home is chaos and laughter during holidays, silent and neat during the everyday. But like many families, beneath our quiet days, shadows have grown, resentments, insecurities, and a constant worry about money. At the center sits tension with my daughter-in-law, and without ever quite saying so, the shifting lines of loyalty between generations and in-laws. The day the photograph appeared, I was helping to clear out boxes before Siona's move. The attic was like a time capsule. There were my children's school notebooks, old newspaper clippings, and prized items my late father-in-law had cherished. I almost overlooked the photograph, a small, yellowed picture, the corners rounded with age. In it, my father-in-law stood arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize. Behind them, the faded sign of an old furniture shop, Tareem Furniture, and a barely discernible date. The back of the photo was even more mysterious, a trembling line of numbers, like a code, or maybe a date, or a password. I couldn't pull my eyes away, nor could I explain why this triggered such panic in me. All at once, thoughts of Mi-jung pressed their way in. If the photograph was a storm, she was the persistent drizzle I could neither ignore nor escape. Lately, our conversations swirled around the fate of our family home. Mi-jung suggesting, sometimes boldly, sometimes with the cold logic of youth, that it was natural for parents to pass their assets to children, to move on and make way for the next generation. I felt pushed to the edge of my patience. I wanted to protect what we'd built, what my father-in-law had left behind, but I could barely articulate it. Instead, I merely changed the topic at the table, or smiled as if her words were nothing but idle talk, all the while burning with frustration inside. And then there was Do-hyun, my son-in-law. He visited often under the pretense of expanding his business, but every conversation with my husband was tight with tension. I could see the silent power struggles, the pride, the small hostilities that family masks cannot quite cover. Each side, my husband and my son-in-law, watched me carefully as if waiting for my approval or my misstep. I felt like the counterweight in a set of delicate scales, breathing deeply and telling myself that everything, eventually, must pass. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. In the stark kitchen light, I found myself studying every detail. The shop sign, a leaning utility pole, and especially a metal box just visible in the corner of the picture. A story from my father-in-law's last days floated to the surface, half-remembered hints about an important secret. Something he meant to tell my husband and me, but never quite could. I pressed my fingers anxiously along the photograph's back, tracing the strange string of numbers, hoping they might unlock a mailbox or a bank account, or maybe only more questions. I copied them carefully into my notebook. In those weeks, our house grew noisy. I noticed every shuffled conversation, every disguised phone call, every sidewise glance. After one of Do-hyun's visits, I found a printed contract on the dining table. The next day, Mi-jung left an investment proposal out in plain view. No one said outright what they wanted, but their wants floated in those papers, in the glances, in the polite silences that now filled our home. With suspicion circling closer, my trust in my own senses began to fade. So I did something I'd never have imagined. I began to record everything. I carried my phone, switched on its recorder, and told myself I was only gathering evidence in case I needed to defend my choices. Each file became my secret bulwark against confusion. When I listened to the first night's recording, the edges of familiar voices, my husband, Mi-jung, seemed almost unfamiliar. Behind their steady tones, I heard uneasy calculations, but I forced myself not to reach for easy conclusions, because in families, the simplest explanations are often the most dangerous. Days later, I searched for remnants of Tarim furniture. All I found was an old news snippet and, at the riverside where the faded photograph had been taken, a replacement. The shop was now a small workshop, the angles of the building and the sagging pole unchanged. Emboldened, I walked into the nearby bank, armed with nothing but the numbers from the photograph, hoping for a miracle and half expecting humiliation. The teller told me nothing could be checked without exhaustive documents and proof of inheritance. Yet, something about the way she glanced at my papers told me that not all secrets fade with time. I barely slept that night. By day, I paid attention to Mi-jung's words and Do-hyun's moods and Young-soo's sighs. At night, I replayed my voice recordings, growing restless as patterns began to emerge. I wondered if I was only noticing problems because I was looking too hard. For a few days, the house even seemed to settle. Our grandchildren's laughter lit the rooms, and Mi-jung fussed over dinner with some of her old warmth. Do-hyun kept to polite manners. I almost believed I had been the problem all along. That age had made me oversensitive. But another recording jarred me from that illusion. Underneath the surface calm, there was a new tension. My own name drifting through closed-door discussions about who would control the house. My decision, my signature, became points of negotiation. I stopped the recording before I could get too emotional. If I couldn't trust my feelings, at least I could trust facts, however incomplete they were. With questions mounting, I cross-checked the numbers from the photograph against my recordings and notes. A pattern emerged. The numbers matched the title of one particular recording, taken on the night Do-hyun came over. I sat alone at the kitchen table, earpieces in, listening. As the recording played, my husband's voice, usually so predictable, took on an edge I didn't recognize. The words beneath his surface behavior hinted at intentions and plans he had never shared with me, and for the first time, fear began to seep through my certainty. It became clear that what was happening in my home was more than just friction with Mi-jung or a generational squabble with my son-in-law. I laid out my evidence. All the recordings, the photograph at the front, a silent judge presiding over the chaos of our private lives, and I asked myself, who could I actually trust? What was I really trying to protect? In the weeks that followed, the household conflict grew deeper, messier, impossible to escape. Mi-jung pressed again and again for us to consider selling the house to move somewhere smaller and more modern. She presented it as a practical step, a kindness for tired elders. But behind her practicality, I sensed another layer, an urgency I couldn't place. When I edged close to voicing my worries, she would dissect my reasoning line by line, meeting my emotions with relentless logic. Do-hyun continued to frustrate and exhaust me. He and my husband had more meetings without telling me, their conversations hushed and their greetings quick. The sense that I was being cut out, by those closest, gnawed at me. I swallowed words I wanted to spit out, turned instead to the only defense left. Another recording, another record. I needed something more steadfast than my own memory. By then, I had learned to steel myself every day. I reminded myself that the moment I let go of the truth, all would be lost. I told myself it was my turn now, and that sometimes, even a wobbly voice must learn to speak up. Still, nothing prepared me for what I found one particular evening. Rummaging in the living room drawer after my husband had gone to bed, I discovered a sheath of papers. My name and seal were stamped, clear as daylight, on documents relating to the house. Except I had never stamped them. The resemblance was uncanny, the signatures perfect. Dread climbed off my spine. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand frozen on the rim of the drawer, realizing some part of our lives had moved beyond words and was now rooted in deception. The next morning, I returned to the bank, photograph in hand, and for the first time, learned the truth the numbers had guarded. There existed a deposit account, opened long ago in my father-in-law's name, with a secondary beneficiary, me. I felt heat burn up my cheeks. This was no dramatic scandal or secret double life. The truth was quieter and more painful. It turned out that something my father-in-law had treasured and protected was left in my name. What I didn't know was that someone else in my family had been trying to use it as leverage, trying to claim it, unseen, behind my back. That night, I sat awake, listening and re-listening to every recording, focusing especially on those with my husband and Do-hyun. I'd started this journey convinced that Mi-jung's ambition was squeezing me out, and that she was the threat. But in the files, her voice was not coercive. I began to hear her cautioning against reckless plans, trying to prevent my husband and Do-hyun from taking advantage of the house and the deposit. The aggression I'd read as hostility was her armor, her way of keeping me out of a storm she feared would hurt me. The truth smacked hard. The person I least suspected, my own husband, had been quietly plotting with Do-hyun, seeking loopholes to access money left for me, while I had mistaken Mi-jung's motives the whole time. I slept little that night, my heart thudding with anger and regret. But I knew I had to act. I did not gather the family for a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I arranged my files, made notes of each event, attached bank confirmation papers, and laid them out on my husband's desk, beginning with the photograph that had started it all. Then quietly, I paced the living room, feeling every creak of the floor underfoot as a step towards the future. That evening, my husband found my evidence. I listened from the kitchen as his breathing shifted, as the weight of proof pressed down. I didn't go in to start a fight or lecture. Resentment is poison when you drink it too long. Instead, I went first to Mi-jung, told her everything I had learned, and apologized for guarding so fiercely against her. I admitted I had mistaken her defensive efforts for attack. She closed her eyes for a long moment, then assured me she would help manage the legal steps, allowing me to decide what to do next. A strange, welcome determination settled inside me, the determination of someone whose turn it finally is to choose. The weeks that followed were busy with bank visits and legal arrangements. The photograph never left my wallet. The recordings never left my side. Though my husband and Do-hyun blustered at first, they had to bow before documents, dates, and the professional explanation of the law. Our arguments, once personal and sharp, faded into a kind of resignation. Time softened pride, evidence forced understanding. Sometimes, late at night, I'd take out that old photo and stare at it by lamplight. It was never just a key to money or property. What that photograph unlocked was the endurance, the steadiness handed down through silent, loving fathers-in-law and stubborn, uncertain daughters-in-law. The real legacy was not the house or account, but the choice to trust when it mattered most, and the humility to admit when you've been wrong. When I gathered my family together at last, I laid out a timeline written in my own hand. I spoke of how that photograph had thrown my world into disarray, but, ultimately, protected my place in it. What I saw as a feud with Jung had been my own fear, distorted by fatigue. The struggle with Do-yoon had been pride, dressed up as principle. Now, I would look after both boundaries and love, not succumbing to suspicion, but not blind to it either. Instead of blaming, I would choose the third way: procedures, records, and clarity. So now, as I sort through these memories, I feel compelled to ask you, the listeners who have lived long enough to know how trust can be broken and patched. When you're wavering between faith in your loved ones and the need to protect yourself, what is it you hold on to in your hands?